Planning and Transport Policy Subcommittee of the Executive of Somerset Council. We have a number of people in the room and we have some online. What I would do, just to ensure total transparency, I will introduce the people as we go around the room and then the ones online. We have with us this afternoon, and I would just do them as in seated order, Martin Evans, the Council's solicitor, Alison Blom-Cooper, the Head of Planning for the Council, Nick Tate, Planning Service Manager, Service Manager, Sarah Grabau, and I think Planning Policy again, Theo Butt-Phillips, a member of the executive team, Councillor Richard Wilkins, lead member for Transport, myself, Rosalind Wycombe, the lead member for Economic Development Planning and Assets. We have Paul Hickson, Service Director for Economy, Employment and Planning, Sarah Wakefield, the Associate Member for Commercial Investment and Risk, Mike McDowell-Jones, who is the Service Director for Infrastructure and Transport. That's it, thank you. We also have in the room Kate Murdoch, who is a planning policy lead, and we have behind us a member of the public and sorry, I don't know you. A graduate planner, welcome. And we have online so that there is clarity here. And another executive lead member, Dixie Dutch, and then a number of planning officers, a fair number. And can someone clarify, are there any members of the public in that team?
Yes, Chair. It looks like, if I'm getting this correctly, there's a gentleman called Andy Lehner and also Kevin Bird.
Okay, so we have a number of members of the public online as well. And I welcome into the room Councillor Rigby, another executive member. Right, welcome everyone. And we have today a webcast system which is hopefully we're sure that everyone can hear and see things, but we're working in a slightly smaller room. Councillor Rigby, there's a
I've been sat for hours on the stand for a while.
Okay. There is a marathon meeting going on next door to us aboard it, understandably. So the meeting is a webcast, and so they're members of the public can observe the meeting remotely and of course in person. There may be a slight delay between agenda items, but we will try to move this meeting forward as quickly as we can. The agenda pack with papers were available to the councillors on WardGov and on the council website, and there was a link sent out to all members. Please, if you wish to speak, can you either put up your hand if you're online or indicate in the normal way if you're in the room. And when you do so, can you identify who's speaking so that everybody is aware of it? This meeting will be audio recorded. And finally, I just ask for everyone, if you are referring to papers, that you use the page numbers from the published pack so that everyone can find the appropriate place. So we now move on to apologies for absence. And Claire, can you?
Yes, Chair. So we've had apologies from Councillor Bill Revens, and we've got apologies from Dixie Dutch, who's attending online and is being substituted by Councillor Theo Butt-Phillips.
Thank you very much indeed. We have minutes of the last meeting. Our people, that was held on the 19th of December, and are people content with them? Any queries? If not, could I have a proposer and seconder? Thank you. And a seconder, please. Thank you. Right, on to declarations of interest. Do we have any members of the committee who have any additional declarations of interest? No, thank you.
We're carrying down the workforce.
That is
already
already on your formal declaration. It's only specifically in this committee because it's planning and related that you need to specifically be clear. Right, we then move on to public question time, and I've not received any submissions by the deadline and no requests for late questions. Okay, thank you for that. We shall then move on to Planning and Transport Policy Subcommittee Forward Plan. And I don't know whether Alison, you want to make any comments on what's already included in the pack?
There's no further additions to what's included in the pack.
Okay. Any comments on that? Are people content at this stage? Good, thank you for that. We'll then move on to item 6, the Community Infrastructure Levy, CIL, as we all know, still relief policies. And I will ask Nick to introduce the paper, please.
Thank you, and if I can, I will try and put my slides up on them.
Well, we wait for these slides to come up, just to remind people, this is a policy. It's not specific to any one area. This is a one for the whole of the council going forward. And it is a general policy rather than site specific. Thank you, Nick.
Yes,
You
and
now have your slides.
let's see if I can control them, that would be the next challenge. The main purpose of this report is to bring some consistency across now that we're one unitary council. As it says, we've inherited 3 charging areas. So Planning East, which is effectively the former Mendip district council area, doesn't currently have community infrastructure levy. The majority of the remainder that the council does within Somerset Western Taunton, it is the former Taunton Deane Borough Council area that I said. So I'm afraid, apologies for it being a little bit complicated, but within those 3 charging areas, we consider it's important that we do have consistency, particularly in terms of the sort of policies, and in a moment as we move on to it, some of our exceptions policies which we would apply. Just to make it clear that the actual individual charging rates, these aren't something which are up for discussion through this process. If we were to change our charging rates, it would need to be through the formal SIL process, and that's most likely will be something that will happen in parallel with the local plan process, depending on sort of government guidance at that stage.
Is it possible for the areas that don't charge still to be brought into still charging?
If they did, they would have to go through the formal SIL process, evidence-based consultation, public examination. So the reality is that there would be little benefit in doing that individually. It would be better to do that collectively, because we'll be moving forward with a single new local plan and a single infrastructure sort of delivery program. But as it says, in particular, this paper is looking at having consistency across the discretionary social housing relief policy, and also exceptional circumstances relief policy. So just touching on discretionary social housing relief, there is a mandatory relief for social housing. So the social housing we achieve through Section 106 agreements can apply. They still have to apply, but they have mandatory relief from SIL. But there is an opportunity to extend that, so that if that is the discretionary element, and that could then apply to affordable housing, which we secure over and above that policy position. It's particularly useful because working with agencies such as Homes England, where subsequently are looking at times to come in and increase the affordable housing provision on some of our sites. This aids that grant position in terms of relieving them from the SIL burden, meaning that we can layer in additional grant through the likes of that body. So it is a way of getting additionality, in particular, and increasing our affordable housing provision across sites. I think that's, and that is the critical issue which we've been considering, because we do need to remember when we grant any SIL relief, that does mean there is less SIL actually going into our overall pots for infrastructure. But in cases like this, it's because we are delivering other priorities. What we are suggesting, though, both in terms of having a consistency, currently it is the former Taunton Deane Borough Council charging area that has discretionary social housing relief. So we're proposing that should apply to all of the charging areas. But also as part of extending that policy, as it says on the side, having some criteria for judging when we want to consider discretionary housing relief. Importantly, there does need to be evident that there is a requirement and affordable housing need. It would be very rare, I suggest, in our current climate that isn't going to be evidence. As it says there about the delivery needing to be delivered through one of our approved delivery partners. And in particular, if we're looking at schemes where you're increasing the proportion of affordable housing, potentially to be delivering 100% affordable housing, we are suggesting that it's important that there is local community support for increasing that delivery. It's not always a clear case, and this is all about actually delivering improvements and advantages for those local communities. So we felt it was important to have a criteria that identify the opportunity to get local support for that. In terms of the exceptional circumstances relief, this is potentially one of the more significant areas of relief. Again, currently it's available in two of the charging areas, so the former St Paul District Council and Taunton Deane Borough Council areas. And again, it's proposing to extend that across to South Somerset area. It's important it is highly regulated, this process in any case. You can only grant exceptional circumstances relief where there is an existing Section 106 agreement in place in any case, and where it is considered, so demonstrated that by paying the levy in full, it would have an unacceptable impact on the scheme's viability. And indeed, to judge viability, any application needs to be supported by an independent viability assessment. So either they can submit a viability assessment, which has been the authors have been agreed jointly by council and applicants, or in many cases, we would have that viability assessment then subsequently reviewed by an independent person at council's appointment. Is to ensure that viability evidence everyone agrees, because it is fundamental to the case.
Would I ask a question, since it said, the viability assessment is paid for by the developer or the promoter?
Yes.
And so what safeguards have we got in place that do we approve individuals who are seen to be independent, or are we presented with a fait accompli on this?
The experience, certainly, that in the cases we've been involved in, is the developer themselves has submitted their viability. We have, at their expense, commissioned our own review of that using experts who work on mainly with our affordable housing team. So they are effectively retained by the council. The alternative would be going direct to them, but saying you need to use this company to undertake the review because they are working independently and are agreed by the council. The crucial thing is it's not the developer's viability that goes unchallenged.
Okay, can we be assured, because we have inherited 6 different local plans and processes, but we do have a uniform approach across the whole of the county area in terms of handling viability, because I think this is an area of great contention and real concern. And I don't know, I appreciate your talking from your personal experience within one of the former district areas. but can we perhaps just find some assurance for this committee going forward around how there is a uniform approach to viability?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And one of the opportunities in particular is collectively, we can agree, you know, we will individually have independent firms that undertake the review, so we can collectively have, these are the people which, you know, we will expect to be used to undertake independent viability, so that we're using, you know, people that have met our consistent standards in terms of their impartiality.
Thank you. Can we perhaps come back with some sort of assurance to this committee that that there is now a uniform approach?
Yes,
to
we
it?
can.
Because I probably get more noise about this than virtually anything that in agreeing 106s. But anyway, I think the viability is really quite an important process.
Yeah, absolutely. It is fundamentally underpins any request.
Thank you. Nick, I think, Alison, you wanted.
No, I was just going to add that we have just through the structure for the planning service brought the SIL and section 116 into one team. And so that will help, and liaising with our colleagues in the enabling housing team as well, because as Nick says, we use them often to procure viability, independent viability assessments.
I think this is particularly relevant, and I'll put on record that we recognise that we have, because of phosphates and other issues, a considerable amount of housing which has been either land banked or sat waiting, and people's purchase price or option price or some of that land will lead to challenges again around the delivery of SIL and even more importantly, 106 applications. And I just think we need to be really as robust as we can on viability.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to overrate the point, but I think it's one which many members are concerned about. Thank you. Sorry, do continue.
And just final point on this slide was that if you to be granted exceptional circumstances relief, you can't have benefited from any other form of community infrastructure relief. So that's important. It's not a and situation. It's either this, or if you wanted to apply for affordable housing, mandatory affordable housing relief, you need to choose which path to go down. So picking up on this is very much about trying to get that consistency and having some actual structure, some principles of which to assess any applications for exceptional circumstances relief, because I think collectively we either all do things slightly differently or indeed only use for viability and didn't have any additional criteria. So we are proposing that there are criteria within the policy which will guide that process. So I think importantly, that first one talks about the sites normally being within either our 5-year housing land supply or allocated in a plan or other adopted plan or strategy, i.e. it's a site which as a council we need to come forward. I think this is important because it's also about saying we're not likely to be granting exceptional circumstances relief for speculative applications which aren't in accordance with our published plans and policies. We're saying, and as well as that, the benefits of granting the benefits of proposals such as in terms of what they're delivering, and we do identify what they might include, such as maybe delivering wider regeneration, restoration of important heritage assets, for example, community facilities, etc., affordable housing. The benefit of delivering those needs to outweigh the value of any relief granted. So again, this is about saying we accept that if we relieve you of some of your SIL obligations, it's on the basis that you're actually delivering key priorities which are at that value or greater. So this isn't about allowing people, shall we say, to deliver less. It's effectively saying you're delivering infrastructure in a different way in most cases. And also that Section 106 agreement has direct financial implications on the viability. The wording of the regulations is slightly ambiguous because it just talks about there needing to be a Section 106 agreement. And we have certainly had experience of a local labour agreement secured through Section 106 being cited as saying, well, we can pick that box, we've got a 106, but that in itself had no impact on the viability itself. So this is where the Section 106 is securing those wider community benefits, also maybe additional off-site transport infrastructure, which was not envisaged through the process, etc. So it needs to relate to the viability.
Okay, any questions so far? No,
Nearly there, but I think actually it was important actually to give this structure. We then go on also, I'm sure we won't necessarily think of every eventuality, but we have suggested the site shouldn't be artificially subdivided. There are situations, or we could envisage situations where someone decides to subdivide their site so that the first phase is artificially taking the majority of the infrastructure on that. We grant exceptional relief on that. A subsequent phase comes along, which, you know, would have withstood, if you looked at it as a whole, would have meant the viability of the site as a whole wouldn't have needed relief. So we just want to be careful that people aren't trying to sort of salami slice their scheme so they can get exceptional relief on part of it and then get, shall we say, a sort of slightly less requirements on subsequent phases and increase potentially developer profit. We do flag up that when we're considering exceptional circumstances, we normally expect it to exclude things which you should have been able to take into account through the planning process. Ground conditions is one of those obvious ones. You should actually know if you have to pile, that's not an exceptional cost. It is a development cost and it should be reflected in land price. We have therefore, you know, these are examples, but we've flagged up also neutrality. Maybe when it first came in, absolutely, but there's no excuse for not knowing that that is an issue which you need to build in terms of mitigation. The same will go if people start citing biodiversity net gain. It's like, this has been signposted for a long time. That's not an exceptional cost. It's something that you should put built in. It wouldn't be justification for granting relief. We do flag up that if a scheme has gone through planning committee with the assumption that when discussing viability, Section 106 compromises on what that might entail, if through that planning consideration, the viability and an assumption about sill relief has already been discussed, normally we would expect therefore the sill relief to be granted unless they're having this significant material change. The change would probably have to be an uplift, which probably in current climate is less common. And certainly again, in many ways, the discussion should be made at the planning application stage, because that's also when you're discussing the Section 106 requirements and where you may or may not be making compromises. But the bullet point is really to flag up that it has already been subject to detailed discussion through that process. So say normally one would expect any ECR to be approved. Like, it does have to be compatible with UK substitute control legislation, which has superseded state aid. And just in terms of criteria, we've suggested that it would, you know, we would normally seek to make decisions on these applications within 3 months. So those are the criteria that are set out in policy. Coming back to that point again, it has to be based on that independent assessment of viability. And in terms of process, the recommendation is that applications for exceptional circumstance release below 500,000 should be delegated to the head head of planning, chief planning officer, in consultation with the lead member, for economic development, planning and assets. Those above that amount, we would be bringing to this committee, for a decision. Generally speaking, majority of, requests have probably been at smaller amounts, but we will see on the agenda, we do have, one which is over about 500,000 threshold. And just a point, and I do apologise that whilst the report itself talks about, it refers to this coming into effect from if a decision is agreed would come into effect on the 25th of January today. The appendix 3, unfortunately, and my mistake, it refers to the 25th of April, I think, by mistake. It clearly should be, it is in italics, it's clearly text which should reflect the decision date today, but I just want to highlight that the appendices needs to be consistent with the report. I think, let me just guess, yeah, let's just get it goes, yes.
Okay, I've got a number of questions, but before I say anything, any questions in the room from lead members or members here?
Yeah, do you have any idea about sort of the level of claims you might get?
I mean, perhaps ask probably Kate in a moment in terms of because we tend to know our own former areas. As from recollection within the former Sedgemoor area, I can only remember it's maybe 3 previously. So we've got 1 here. So since we introduced it in 2015, 3 or 4 claims. It is still very, very rare. And generally, we will have tried to address these issues probably through negotiations through the planning and the Section 106, rather than really. So it is still, and it needs to be an exception.
Really?
Does it have to come back very soon? I mean, can they come back at any time during the process of building it? Have to be done at a particular point.
It needs to be done before a commencement on site is made.
Okay.
The minute a start on site is made, then if they,
Because they have to pay then, don't they?
yes, yeah.
Richard?
Yeah, I mean, do they have any further recourse if they disagree with the decision? Are they, as a developer, are they able to take it further?
I don't think there's yeah. Yeah, it's not through, there's not a process, there's not in terms of regulations and approach, because it's a discretionary process which we set up. So, if you would need to find grounds to challenge whether the decision was sound.
And has this happened?
No.
It would be a JR. Yeah, it'd be a long process. Two quick questions if I may. One is, and it's just reflecting on this, and I know I've talked about this policy in the past. It feels a bit either or. You either get relief or you don't. Where actually you're silent upon whether or not we could negotiate a 50% relief or some other quantum. Really, just to recognise that it's not just black and white. These things are a judgment, both in terms of viability and also the impact. And therefore, I just wondered whether we should actually say that there could be a negotiation rather than you either get relief or you don't. It could be a percentage, because the numbers are quite significant, some of them, and therefore we might feel that an in-between position might be a more reasonable response to the viability submission. And the second thing is, I think for transparency, for any decision made by the head of planning, the planning officer and lead member, I think should be reported back to this committee in due course, so that if there is a record that then decision has been made, I think that is good governance in that respect. I mean, obviously the applicant will be told, but I just think we need a record as such. I don't know what you think of the been articulating that there is a negotiable position. Is that legally viable?
No, I actually think that process, that certainly my experience to a degree, that process probably has happened before the formal filling in of the SIL application forms. What we could do is, it's almost like as a note, add that, you know, strongly recommend that you, before you submit any claim, that you discuss, you know, with officers. I suppose fundamentally, the viability would be, you know, if SIL relief is granted sufficient enough to make the scheme viable, so it all comes back to the viability evidence. But I've got a current case where we did negotiate it downwards, and indeed the other one which is on the agenda here, through the balance negotiations on the section 106 as well, where we were saying, you know, we're looking at affordable housing, other infrastructure and SIL, which is where we settled upon a midpoint. I think it would be worth, it's more of probably a note to say that you discuss it in advance and potential negotiations, but I think then once the claim comes, it will have to be backed up by all of the criteria and the financial evidence at that stage.
Okay, thank you. A further question I have is in your report on page 26, where you note that 20% of SIL receipts are ring-fenced for the tidal barrier. But I thought there was an end date on that, which you're not indicating. So is this forevermore, or what is the agreement?
Until funding, I'm not going to quite use the word commitments, but basically until the barrier is currently looking to be delivered between 2024 and 2027. And this, importantly, because someone asked us this morning, this is only the SIL receipts within the former Central District Council area as well. And people were slightly concerned that it was 20% of all of the SIL receipts. So this is definitely the former Central charging area. We have a commitment to use best endeavours to deliver partnership funding to the value of £13.7 million. A significant part of that is from the SIL receipts, but this effectively is resolved over the next 18 to 24 months as we move into actual construction and delivery. And if we source funding from other pots, we've been successful in some of the levelling up funding, for example, some of the town deal funding for it, then it relieves the burden on our SIL sooner rather than later.
Okay, because can we take this outside? Because I am absolutely sure I was told by a former officer that we can come back and get some more SIL if needed, because the end date was definitely, I thought 23. But anyway, maybe we can leave that one aside and find out exactly where we are on that.
I also know that a report will need to come to executive, which will the main reason will be about agreement to enter into a new partnership agreement with the Environment Agency to cover the construction. And as part of that will need to deal with the funding commitments, but I'm happy to have a discussion.
Yeah, okay, it's just that it's sitting in this report with a very clear no end date on it.
Yeah.
And I really don't want to agree this report with that no end date. So I just,
yeah, I mean, that is the current position that we just, that it's in terms of our funding commitments or the funding commitments within that charging areas. I suppose what it could say until such time as the barrier is being delivered, because then we know that there's no longer a requirement. But the difficulty as well is the barrier program has moved outwards.
Could we perhaps then just note at this stage that clarity over the 20% SIL contribution to the Bridgewater barrier needs to be resolved post vesting day, and have that in place, because I do think that we can't leave it as open-ended as that at this stage, since we don't actually have a a commitment from central government to deliver. And there are a lot of uncertainties which the people of Bridgewater are very aware of. So we just need to get it.
So for absolute clarity, if we record in the notes for meeting the points around that parity, and if Nick provides some briefing outside of the international licensing, wow.
Okay, so what they're saying, we'll note my query in the minutes and note the fact that there will be an external briefing on the broader issue of
Still,
on the SIL and the timescale of that contribution. Yeah,
Yeah.
people content with that? Yeah, thank you. I'm not seeing any hands up from anybody online. Do I have any other questions in the room around this?
It's okay.
Okay, if that is the case, shall we go to the recommendations? Yep. And the recommendations are right at the beginning of the report. Okay, we have, A to F on these. These are quite a list, but I think it's important for those who haven't got it, we'll just prove it. We approve the introduction of a discretionary, social housing relief for the former, SDC, and SSDC areas and criteria for assessing discretionary SHR. People content? Yeah. We approve the exceptional circumstance relief, the ECR policy applicable to the free charging areas as set out in Appendix 3, including the criteria for assessing applications for relief. Authorise the head of planning, chief planning officer to give formal notice that the reliefs are available in the former SSDC, SSDC and the TDBC areas from the 25th of January. And the council will begin to accept claims for such relief pursuant to the notification requirements of regulation 49B and 56 of the Community Infrastructure Levy Regulations 2010. God, what I'm regretting but it's good practice. Agrees that the applications for still relief to the value of 500,000 and above shall be determined by the Planning and Transport Policy Subcommittee, and agrees that applications for still relief below that value of 500,000 should be delegated to the head of planning in consultation with the lead member. Notes the current SIL infrastructure spending priorities and will consider priorities for spending on specific schemes in the future. And I will add to that, and the decisions made under the value of 500,000 will be reported back to this committee. So that's the additional recommendation. Are people content? Yes. Can I have a proposer, please? And a seconder? Thank you. People content with that? Yeah, voting members, thank you very much indeed, everyone. Right. Item 7, the application for exceptional circumstance relief, Cockerhurst Farm, and I think Nick, you're going to introduce this one. And this, of course, will be against the backdrop of the policy we've just agreed. Nick?
Yes, it makes it slightly easier. I did have to write the report, hedging my bets to a degree. So just in terms of background, Cockerhurst Farm is part of one of the strategic allocations at Bridgewater that was that's included in the adopted local plan. And we have an application for 50% exceptional circumstances relief, primarily on the basis that there's a clear viability evidence, and that the main reasons for that is that in this case, with the exception of one other sites, we help deliver all of our education infrastructure through community infrastructure levy. In the case of this site, because of the size of it, it's actually being delivered, the primary, early years in primary is being delivered on site, and that has been secured through a section 106. So effectively, the requirements that would have been paid by SIL have been secured by section 106 in this case. In addition, this site has to, as it is the first part of the allocation come forward, also has the upfront costs of delivering a four-arm signalised junction, which provides both access to the application site, but also actually will provide access for land to the south, which is sort of in the control of another developer and will be coming forward for a separate planning application. So this site, because it's come first, has a disproportionate amount of the infrastructure costs incurred upon it. And just in terms of the viability assessment, to put it in context, that when the viability assessment was undertaken, various scenarios were tested. The scenario, even with 50% SIL reduction, that still meant that with all the other infrastructure requirements, the affordable housing element had ended up being pushed down from policy target 30% to 11.6%. So it demonstrates even with SIL reduction to make a viable scheme to be able to get that to come forward was still extremely challenging because of those costs, and substantially because the on-site additional costs secured through the 106. Subsequently, after the application was considered by Development Committee, an additional contribution towards off-site improvements, Dunball and signalisation of Dunball roundabout was required. This was on the basis of National Highways position saying without improvements to that roundabout, although it's somewhere distant from this site, it's part of the wider Bridgewater network. Without improvements to that, they would have a condition saying that development could not come forward until those works have been undertaken. We have secured contributions from a range of development applications, therefore around Bridgewater, but that was an additional and unexpected cost to be put on this site. And you'll see from that first point, it had the impact again of reducing the affordable housing down still further because we had nowhere further to go in terms of viability. And when the scheme was approved in August of last year, it was approved on the basis of 50% SIL reduction, the 106 securing an on-site service site and education contributions, construction of the school, and 7.1% of affordable housing. There are uplift clauses so that as subsequent phases are delivered, we will review the viability, and there is a high degree of expectation that actually we will secure additional affordable housing on subsequent phases to come through, because there are some unknowns in terms of final costs, whether any contributions might be secured towards from the junction from the development south, but that is yet to be determined at this stage. In terms of this site, it is quite a critical site in terms of our overall housing land supply. It's, as I say, it's a key strategic site in the plan. We are in very close discussions and with the applicants who basically, if the application for SIL relief is approved, are ready to make a start on site. So we would expect to see actual mobilisation on our site, within a matter of weeks. We have been trying to bring this site forward. The application was 2019, so we've been working on this for many years to get to this point. So we do feel we're at a critical and positive point in terms of finally getting the site away.
Okay. But I appreciate we now have a SIL policy in place. Where in the process going forward would the request to either the head of planning or to this committee for a SIL exemption? Because it seems to me that it's already been agreed, it's bum, and therefore all we're doing is rubber stamping something. And I just really would like to understand where in the process going forward, this committee could consider an exemption.
It is now for this committee to make the decision, and I will briefly have assessed it against the criteria which have now been approved. The application was submitted to us in, I think it was October, so we had the application in advance, which is when, to be honest, it was when the realization was that we didn't have a consistent way of judging these applications, and that is why it's waited until this meeting. But what I've done in anticipation that we would agree the criteria, which we just discussed, what I've now done is then I've assessed it therefore against those criteria to see that it fits or whether that fits.
But going back to my question, Nick, going forward, if there's been a planning approval, knowing that there is an assumption around silt, I'm just concerned, do we have a discussion prior to the planning approval, or do we get it after the planning approval? And if so, at what stage? I'm just unsure as to where in the process the exemption will be sought in the future.
The exemption is always going to be decided either at this committee or as a delegation. Whilst we have the criteria saying it says we normally, because there has been a wider consideration of viability in section 106, this committee is still going to assess it against the policy criteria. It is far from uniform that they are all discussed at a planning committee. What equally happens, and we will certainly have other cases, is maybe a year, 18 months elapses between planning consent, and that's when someone says, well, I've now redone my figures and I wasn't expecting this, because that application will be coming here and assessing against those criteria we discussed, and in particular whether there were new or unforeseen exceptional circumstances which would warrant the permission. The criteria, we need to satisfy that it meets all of the criteria in this process. Then going forward, it's cleaner because we know we have a process and a decision-making vehicle.
But what you're saying to me, if I'm reading correctly, is that the decision to consider a viability and a civil reduction will be taken in advance with the 106 process around the approval planning before it comes to this committee in the future or to the delegation.
Where viability is a key issue that's being discussed through the planning process, absolutely. But a planning committee doesn't have the power to grant the exceptional relief. There can be assumptions made, but it needs to be granted. But
Okay, and I do recognise that we're going to have increasing calls as the viability of sites get challenged in the new environment, let's put it like that. And I just think that we just need to have it quite clear. Because otherwise, it can come here, but if it's already been agreed and assumed and whatever, it's a lot harder then for us to say, actually, this isn't exceptional enough.
yeah. But I think it will be important to emphasise that whatever, even though there may be assumptions, and we've been clear on this when we've discussed with developers, the viability can make those assumptions, but they have to understand that there is a sale process that may or may not be successful. So there is risk.
Yeah. Because I know this particular one, we've got £4.5 million worth of highways work at the cost of probably 20+% of central housing. And that I find really very difficult to swallow. And I appreciate that's historic, but that is quite a significant contribution out of 1,200 houses in addition to all the education. It just seems to me that we need to think about priorities around 106 going forward. And this feels quite uncomfortable.
I suppose the challenge with this in an ideal world, both development parties would be jointly agreeing an equalisation of costs, because the other developer who, so that it's an undetermined planning application as yet, at the moment, potentially have all the benefit from this site putting in the junction infrastructure. It was always whoever went first got to pay for it. But that was why, whilst we can't assume there will be contributions from the other side, we do have the uplift clauses, so that if some of that junction money is clawed back, it was around £1.6 million will be attributed to the site to the south, then that is recycled into affordable housing, and the 106 is clear on
Okay,
that.
so in that respect, before, this is probably outside the remit of this committee, but I also reckon there's over 4 million contribution to education in there. And I assume that it's prorated across the new housing as well.
Yes, the difference, as I say, on this as a strategic site is that rather than education coming out of community infrastructure levy on those other sites, both this site, which actually provides the service site, which and also financial contribution, the site to the south, which forms the remaining part of the allocation, will be again through section 106, will be delivering financial contributions. But education is, as we know, is a significant ask. The key thing here is that the viability needs to support it, but effectively they are delivering their education obligations just through the planning agreement rather than SIL.
Okay, what we have here is very high level. We are not seeing the viability assessment that we assume has been considered, and we will need to at some stage think again about how we take this forward, and also about the other huge demands on this site. So what we've got in front of us is this exceptional enough to be considered for a SIL exemption? Well, I don't know. Anyone wants to say anything, Sarah?
Another question, please. Just want to be absolutely clear about the process. So you have a site, and I know you've said the site's gone on for a long time, and I'm not sure if the section 106 has yet been signed, but you could have a site where you've done a section 106, you've got your planning permission, then you come back and say, oh, viability issue. Before you start on the site, can we have a SIL reduction? You could do it like that. That could potentially happen, couldn't it?
Yeah.
Here, you've said that there's a lot of infrastructure to go in, and there might be a contribution for another developer on another site, presumably using the same roundabout for quite a short way. But this site particularly, you said it's been phased like they often are. So this reduction covers the whole site, all the phase, and they can't come back and say, oh, we've just discovered that the third phase is going to cost more. Can't be that. What about if somebody develops a site beyond this site, where we've given them this? I mean, I suppose what I'm saying is that I don't want to create a precedent for other developers to say, oh, actually, they had it, so we can have it. Because we are losing affordable housing, as Ross has pointed out, and other contribution. And it's the process, and I think Ross was trying to do, was asking a question about that too, how it actually works, because we need to know how it works, but we need to know that it can't be manipulated by the developer either.
Yeah.
Can't they?
And in the case of this, which is this hybrid application, some 238 are full details, so that's the phase which will be commencing. The remainder is still outlined, but in terms of that 650 as a whole, viability assessment was undertaken on 650 units of whole, taking into account on-site provision education rather than SIL. The costs, the upfront costs of the infrastructure, particularly access. Now those access points will be available for subsequent, if there is some residual land which is outside of this application. If we get a planning application for that, they effectively plug into all of that existing infrastructure that's been paid. So I would find it extremely unlikely they could have a viability argument when they won't have paid for their access. The school site will already be in place. They will have to pay a proportionate, but the school site will be in place. Community infrastructure will be in place. All of the ground infrastructure, you're just connecting into that. So someone else coming along at a later stage, it's almost inconceivable they will be able to say, oh, we need sill relief now, because you can't make it work plugging into a site where someone else has done all the upfront work for you. But that's why it comes back to that viability. The viability evidence is key. It's the disproportionate element on the early phases, but there were, I would sort of again emphasize it, you know, key thing here as well is for other sites, this scale, we just said you just pay your education through your community infrastructure levy. The difference here is you're actually paying all of your education contributions and indeed delivering the site through a section 106. So you have made that and more. And we understand that your site viability doesn't enable you to pay twice.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that, you know, we are very comfortable with that position, and that we don't feel we're not, but I accept in terms of the wider planning debate, the viability has had an impact on delivery of affordable housing, but so at the end of the day, that trade and that decision ultimately has been made.
You said that if the other developing site makes a contribution towards this roundabout or whatever they need, that will not change what's happening on this one, because we've already done the relief if that happens. But that we then have some money in hand that we could use for affordable housing somewhere else, or
It would be tied to this site. So because it's down to 7.1%, if there is, for example, contributions exactly from the access point, or for example, ultimately we don't need to call on all of the offsite monies. I think that's probably unlikely, but on Dumble, then those elements, what we say is, right, you've now got an extra £1 million, which you didn't think, and that goes back into the affordable housing. So we're pushing that back up to maybe 10-15%, but it would be on site because we have made such a significant compromise on.
but that wouldn't work if they built it out.
If at the end of the day, the way it's structured is, if the site, I think it's unlikely that it would get to that position, but absolutely, if the site had all been built out, then it then cascades to being money available to be spent in the area to deliver affordable housing on other sites. So we don't lose it. That's great.
Thank you. I think that is reassuring, and hopefully the new site will be policy compliant on affordable housing. But we shall wait and see. Okay, so if there aren't any questions, there's nothing online and nothing in the chat. No. Okay, if people are content, shall we go to a vote? We're being asked to agree that 50% seal exception circumstance relief for the land at Cockerhurst Farm, south of Windham Hill and north of the Quantock Road, to be approved. Are people content with that? Yep. Okay, do we need a formal proposer seconded? Thank you. Seconded. Thank you. Right, thank you, everyone. We'll then move on to 8, and thank you, Nick. That's been helpful to understand a little bit more about how that's going to work going forward. We now move on to forward funding of the access road at Wellington Station. And I'd like Sarah to introduce this, please.
And I'm going to pass it on to Mark Dow-Jones.
Okay, fine.
But I am going to share some slides.
Thank you, Sarah. Michael Dow-Jones, Service Director for Infrastructure and Transport. We thought we would just give you a short presentation to run through the main points of the paper for clarity, just to kind of explain the story to you. It's another SIL-based decision, this time around forward funding for the access road to the proposed new station at Wellington, which also forms part of the infrastructure needed for the development of the Longport Farm development site in Wellington. Next slide, please, Sarah. So I was just going to talk you through briefly the background to the issue and the council's emerging role in the situation and helping move things forward. Obviously, the recommendations of the report, and then some of the financial and risk implications in taking this decision. So, by way of background, the Wellington Station project is part of a a broader Devon Somerset Metro network project. Wellington and Clumpton stations have been jointly promoted over the last few years as being investments that work well together in terms of improving the region's rail offer, with obviously a vision to improve sustainable transport options, particularly in the area of Exeter, Taunton, Clumpton and Wellington, but also the evolving developments around Clumpton, Culton Garden Village in Devon. So the former Somerset Western Taunton Council did a lot of work with partners to develop the business case for the station, and were very successful in doing that and secured £5 million from the Department of Transport, which has gone to Network Rail as the rail delivery organisation for their development costs to actually develop the station, to finalise the business case, develop the early feasibility, actually in some detail, feasibility and planning for the site, to get it to a point where it can be delivered. And the Minister of State for Rail confirmed in October of last year that the Department of Transport has allocated funding to the full project to actually construct it, subject to a final business case being approved, which we understand is going very well and is likely to be approved fairly shortly. So really, this is where we come in. Obviously, the timing of the delivery of the new station and access to the new station is critical. Network Rail, as we sit here, are currently aiming for the delivery of the station by September 2025. Obviously, that's the ambition, and they are some way through the detailed design, development and planning processes. That date may end up changing, but as we sit here, that's what we're aiming at. And so timely delivery of the access road is really important to tie in with that delivery timescale. The road was not included within the delivery package that Network Rail are taking forward because it does form an intrinsic part of the housing development. Nonetheless, these are all integral parts of an overall package for the area. So there's a fairly complex picture of working out how the various elements are taken forward and to ensure that they tie in at the appropriate times. But I think giving that reassurance to the Department of Transport and Network Rail that there is a mechanism to deliver the access road on Network Rail's current timescales is really important. It's a rare funding opportunity, so we need to seize that. Next slide, please. And there are obviously various targets within this, so we need to make sure that access to the station site is available in time for the station construction to start. And so that needn't be the finished road, but it needs to be in a state to be able to construct the rail station. And then the road needs to be adopted as a public road by the time the station opens. And the housing development application is currently under consideration in the area, which also includes residential employment uses and the access road, actually as part of that application. I think it's fair to say what we're doing here is giving flexibility to the situation, demonstrating that we can, between us, deliver what's necessary under the required timescales. But whilst we're doing this, Network Rail are also considering their options. So their construction access might, for instance, be delivered by a dedicated haul road, which needn't be necessarily along the same alignment as the final road. So there are options that are being considered at the moment, but we just wanted to make sure we've got ourselves in a position where we can demonstrate delivery. Again, as we sit here, the developer can't guarantee that the road would be available as part of the housing development under the timescales necessary, which is really what's prompting us to ask for the financial flexibility to step in and be able to demonstrate we can design plan, procure and deliver a solution on relevant timescales. Next slide, please. Yeah, so, yeah, this is a collaborative venture. I wouldn't want to stress that. You know, detailed collaborative discussions are ongoing about roles and responsibilities and how we manage the various risks. We are suggesting at the moment potential costs for design and construction. These are very, very early, high-level estimates. So just to give us a broad envelope to be working with in the context of allocating some of the SIL programs for this requirement. The actual costs will be some of the outputs from the design process that we are due to get into shortly. So just to assure people that, you know, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to finalise the costs, and then we'll collaboratively share those with the developers and obviously conclusions about the delivery mechanisms. So the proposal is for SIL funding to be allocated to provide that cash flow opportunity. The aim would be to fully recover funds used for this through Section 106 or other legal mechanisms if required. And again, it's very early days on that. We don't have a form of legal agreement worked up and agreed. That would be one of the early next stages to actually go into those detailed discussions and seek to come to an agreement. Next slide, please. So we thought it'd be worth just recapping on the SIL position, just to give some assurance about the ability of the SIL account and projecting forward what it would be to accommodate this extra requirement. So I'm just going to ask Kate to briefly run through this to explain the position for you.
Can you just stop before we go there, because any questions on what Mike has shared with us today? I have a couple, but go on, Sarah.
I'm assuming that the developer can't be brought into line, because normally when you're building an estate, you build it with the road as you go along. You don't build the road first. And that's one of the problems I'm assuming is why they can't guarantee the road will be built, because they don't know how far they've got with the houses. Right then, and it's very short timescale actually now anyway, isn't it, to get on site and build all the houses and all the rest. Is that the first?
I'm sure, I mean, there are a number of risks, I'm sure, around, you know, the developer doesn't have planning consent yet. You know, there are detailed planning processes to go through. There is also, as you say, probably, you know, the ordinary way of delivering this if the station wasn't there would be to phase the delivery of the road in accordance with the development build out. So all of that sort of stacks up to being able to say, well, we can't sit here and guarantee it will be open. And you know, we need to provide that surety back up to the funders, so that the station. So that's really why we're here. Yeah.
And I see a potential problem if the developer wanted to start on site and we were building the road, if we were to do it ourselves, because you just get in there, you're going to construct it on site at the same time, it's never a good plan. Is it? I mean, I did have a client who decided to build the road, which I suppose what we might do, and the developer next door did his own thing and then complained about the road and litigated about the road forever afterwards and said hadn't been done properly. So, you know, it's not a great way of doing it really, unless we get the developer to.
Yeah, so I think those are very good points to raise, and I think this is why it needs to be a collaborative venture, that we work through the consenting strategy and work out the logical way of delivering the outcomes, both in terms of getting the road in place and development in place, subject to the planning requirements. And absolutely right, we don't want people tripping over each other with different contractors trying to do working in the same space at the same time. I would hope that were we to actually be the delivery body, that delivery of the whole road up front can provide some additional efficiency and flexibility in terms of building the development rapidly potentially. So I think, you know, the timescales, different phasing might be different depending on who's delivering the road. That's something we would be exploring, I think, as part of the early stages of working this out.
My other point about this, which is, would you speak up a bit? So my other point I'm just about to go through is that they might come back and say they want to have some kind of SIL reduction.
Well, it's not a still charging area.
Yeah.
So it will all be dealt with by Section 106, and that is still part of the a conversation that we're going to have, because we're still waiting for the viability studies to be submitted and tested independently.
Wellington did it all, so it's not in a civil area.
No, it's not within the silt charge.
It's an exempt area. Could I just ask a question? The train site, is that land acquired by Network Rail already?
Don't know the answer to that. Actually, ask that. You know? Obviously, we do have the developer in the room, but Sarah.
The land itself that's required for the station and platforms was already owned by Network Rail. But the associated infrastructure that we're talking about, the mobility hub that's alongside it, that's owned by other parties.
Okay, and the Hall Road, would that, what's the normal practice? Is this just, do British Rail have a particular right to use the land just as national grid?
It would need to be by agreement. Yeah, but I think if that turns out to be the most efficient way of dealing with things, that may well be what we will come to agree. But yeah, all of this needs to be by discussion and agreement.
No, so it's not equivalent to a CPO and a national organisation.
No, I don't think Network Rail have the right to just go and
Okay.
do that.
Just trying to understand the bigger picture in that respect. Okay, any other questions, or shall we go on and have a look at the SIL issues?
Yes, this is just to explain the current SIL projections, what's in the pot at the moment. So the top left-hand corner is the balance as at the 12th of January. And total SIL income projection over the next few years. Slides and the lines under capital expenditure are the allocations that have been currently agreed for town centre pedestrian cycle improvements. There's an allocation there towards the Orchard Grove Primary and some of the town centre flood works are the current allocations. So you see at the bottom there, we've plugged in the £5 million ask. And just to kind of flag up that the potential risk is that there might be a shortfall if we end up needing to use all of that money in 26, 27 against the projected income going forward. So it's not reallocating any of the current allocations. It's just adding that in and just wanting to flag up that the financial risk potentially comes in 25, 26 or 26, 27, depending on whether the projected SIL income that we've estimated based on what we've collected historically is actually, comes to fruition. But those are the kind of risks that we're facing in doing this, but that's if we need full amount in 24, 25. And in the event that it is, if we did need that full amount, that it isn't paid back by that year.
So you're saying the risk, if I translate it into layman's terms, is in 2 to 3 years' time, if the housing estate isn't built out and we can't get SIL, but we will be available to 106 on that side. And so I'm just concerned, if it is 106 rather than SIL, can we make sure that it can be ring-fenced for the surface water work? I don't know what the rules would be around that.
But I suppose kind of the assurance that we've got is that there are other funding pots that we can explore for some of those projects. So SIL was always allocated on the understanding that we would seek match funding, not that it would be 100% available for one project.
Thank you, that's helpful.
And I think there's a number of, these are assumptions as we sit here, and there are a number of moving parts to this. There's the projected income, there's the spend on all of the projects and programs, and that might change as we go forward, and we, any slippage in those other projects would ease the position in that year. So, and then we have flexibility, obviously, to look at the situation and down tune some of the other programs if we need to, and for a point in time. So I think we're comfortable that it's a situation we can manage within the financial position here, and we're comfortable in recommending that that's achievable. Yeah.
And just for total clarity, the SIL relates to the SIL to Southwest SWAT area only. And also the SIL income is limited, and the allocation calls on it again only to the related area, planning area. Yeah. So I'm just aware that we've got people online who are from other places and looking at this, and this is specific to this particular local plan area. Sarah?
Yeah, can I just ask about the income you've got, because I know some SILs coming in from the Orchard Grove development, and they need that to buy the land and so do the community section of that. So does that include the Orchard Grove money?
The projected SIL income is how that's calculated at the moment is on the basis that the 13 million that we collected as at 23-24 is. So we've been collecting since the 1st of April 2000. That's what we've collected in the pot so far. And it's divided up over those number of years to project what we could have going forward. Now, the invoices under SIL income based on SIL demand notices, those are ones where we've actually invoiced for it. And we can guarantee that money coming in unless we have to take enforcement action for non-payment. So, but the projected income is just looking at what we've collected historically to estimate what's going forward. Now, the projects that you're talking about, are you talking about not just the Orchard Grove primary, you're talking about the other community facilities? Yeah. So there isn't a specific allocation at this current time for those, but I understand there's discussions with Town Council and to understand the element of the meaningful proportion, because I think
They should get.
Town Council will get about £3 million of SIL in.
Yeah, they should get 25% because Charles got
In there in terms of income from that Orchard Grove development as a whole. So there are ongoing discussions around delivery of the community infrastructure, but the Town Council will get quite a significant sum.
Yeah, I'm just worried about Robbie Peter to pay for.
I think it's important to note that what we're saying is we're borrowing this money from the SIL pot. It will be repaid and recycled back into the SIL pot, so we're not losing money in that sense from the SIL pot.
To cash flow.
I have a question online from Councillor Dodge.
Thank you, Chair. So this table is kind of very helpful in seeing how the allocation is set out, and I completely appreciate the kind of, I mean, I'm delighted about our success with the Wellington station. Very much want it to go ahead. My question really is: has Wellington, have any housing developments in Wellington contributed to this SIL pot?
So the Wellington area is zero rated for SIL purposes. But that boundary around Wellington is pretty tight. So if the development comes forward that falls just outside that boundary, they are liable for the higher rate. And there have been some developments that have paid, and Wellington Town Council has had some meaningful proportion as a result of that. I can't name the specific developments, but if you're interested, Dixie, I can get that information from our SIL officer.
Okay, thank you. In the light of the previous discussion about kind of making policy, kind of the same across the board, is that situation with Wellington not contributing to SIL, is that going to continue?
Well, this will come back to when we get the new local plan in place and what we do about SIL going forward. So under the viability evidence that informed the SIL charge rate, it was considered that Wellington was not viable to charge SIL against the other Section 106 contributions that are anticipated to come forward.
I get you. So,
but in terms of whether Wellington will end up implementing SIL or any other form of infrastructure levy that the government might decide to bring in. That will be a decision that we'll need to consider as part of the new Somerset wide local plan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that.
And also, Dixie, you must remember that Mendip don't have SIL at all, but they have a 106 regime as a dual areas. And that SIL can be received as either or to the 106, and you can
Yeah.
cover things that way. So it's not as if Wellington aren't contributing, because they do have 106 agreements.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's helpful.
Those ones are meaningful in that respect, and then again, site specific. Right, any other comments? What would be
More
nice?
slides, Chair, to finish up on events.
Sorry, I didn't realise there was any more.
Sorry, just,
Got the recommendations.
yeah, just a couple of brief slides. We can just go on to the next one. So this is just to recap on the recommendations. Next slide, Sarah. That's okay. Yeah, so I mean, this really just covers off what we covered really, that it's about confidence in deliverability of the new station. We just talked about this, you know, the SIL issues and the management priorities within SIL. And then really, so the last point is the risk about recovering the funds. So as we sit here again, we don't have an agreement that's been worked out in detail with the developers. So, you know, there is a risk associated with the full recovery of the funds. We will be entering into discussions to Section 106 and any legal agreements and contracts between us. And the way we will do that is to collaboratively share our information, our cost information as the proposals develop, agree a consenting and delivery strategy and a time frame for that cost recovery such that it's manageable and done transparently with all parties. So we're very confident that we can move forward on this step by step. Once we've got the in-principle agreements, we use SIL if we need it. Yes, I think it's just recaps on things that I've already said, so I'll conclude there. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, any further thoughts on the risks? So just for clarity, at the moment, there is no planning permission for the development. There's no planning permission for the road. But there is agreement that the Department of Transport are supporting the introduction of a new station there.
Correct.
Yeah, like for the station either.
No, not as yet. No, that's coming good, isn't it?
So I think.
Planning consent.
No, we haven't been planning consent.
No. Okay, so what we're being asked for is temporary use of SIL to enable the council to move forward on the delivery of the access to the station, and also then agreement that the 106 and heads of terms for forward funding access road and associated infrastructure is delegated to the officers, Chief Planning Officer, Service Director for Infrastructure and Transport in consultation with the Director for Legal Services. So that's the 106. Okay, any further thoughts from anybody?
Please.
Yeah, is it reasonable to actually build the road in that time? You've got to get planning permission, you've got to get on site, you've got to build it. It says September 25. Is that really realistic?
Yeah, it's challenging, but it's achievable as we said.
How many yards of road is it?
I'm afraid I don't have the figure.
No, I'm just wondering the quantum of what you're trying to build. I mean,
It's like that.
or metric rates.
So Sarah may have some information. I think that's probably next.
400 feet.
Oh, so it's not a mine.
We don't use yards anymore.
Sorry, I still live with my American background.
And I think to give some assurance, we've obviously been out on site and had a look fairly recently, and it's it's across Greenfield. It's not a technically very difficult piece of infrastructure to deliver. It's fairly straightforward. But yeah.
And you've got the first bit, not little, haven't you? The first bit.
Yes, sir.
Okay, we're moving into the planning element of it. What we're trying to do here is saying, are we prepared? to see the SIL being used to forward fund this. And we are dependent upon a number of decisions which we're leaving to the planning team in respect of the 106 and recovery, and also to Mike's team to agree the appropriate delivery of that road. So what we've got in front of us is looking about forward funding, and are we content with that? I think it's a general agreement, yep. And I think on that basis, and we're content that the 106 will be agreed in the normal way by the planning team. Yep. Right.
I mean, the application, just to give you confidence, the application will be going to committee.
Good. I should think so too. Thank you for that. Okay, so on that basis, I'm quite content to call this meeting to a close. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I think this committee, if it's as interesting as this one, will be something we will look forward to in the months to come. Thank you very much indeed, everyone. And thank you to the members of the public who are